It's a very popular program, so we wanted to invite him back. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. You never really know how well you do unless you get invited back. I think it must have been okay, last year. Brian King, I've been at the, in Hinsdale here for 8 years. So this is my 8th year here as the police chief, but I've been in law enforcement for 38 years.
Wow.
Ironically, I started when I was in college. As a summer job, I worked for the police department here. I grew up in LaGrange Park, so I was a non-sworn service officer here in the summer. But when I graduated from college, I went to work up in Wilmette. Because they were hiring and their pay is always really high up in that northern suburbs area. So I spent 30 years up there. Most of my career kind of touched operations and criminal investigations. I did like 4 years in patrol and then got promoted up into a detective bureau. And then I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to supervise some like ad hoc burglary task forces. So I spent a lot of my career just doing like burglary investigations with groups of guys based on like pattern analysis. Or if somebody just came out of prison and they became active again, we try to follow them around. Somebody, they were caught again. And then good chunk of my career, after the Browns chicken and pasta massacre up in Palatine, they decided they wanted a standard homicide task force. So I supervised the homicide task force for the northern part of Cook County. So we would like the Chicago border north to Lake Cook Road, and then maybe all the towns west to like roughly Wheeler. So probably the largest part of my career was just doing homicide investigations in that footprint. I did 8 years as a deputy chief up there, and then I got an additional 8 years as the police chief, and then I retired up there when I hit 30. In municipal policing, your pension just like freezes once you hit that 30 mark. So if you still have to work, it's advantageous to go somewhere. And as luck would have it, right when I was in the market, Hinsdale was advertising for a police chief. So this is it's weird leaving in the 80s. It's like a 20-year-old kid and then coming back like 30 years later. It's a little bit. We're gonna go through. As I figure out how our remote works here. All right, we're gonna just. We're just gonna hit agency profile. This is kind of the status of the night. We'll discuss current and historical crime trends. We'll kind of break them down and just to talk about like local strategies we have at the Hinsdale Police Department. We'll give you a little bit of the overall perspective on, I think, what keeps crime down in the community, and then we'll go into a question and answer period. We are a relatively small shop. Hinsdale Police Department has 25 sworn officers. So the minimum staffing is 3 cars in the street, like overnight and at any given time. There's other officers that are assigned to the school. There's other officers that are assigned to criminal investigations. And then the staff is relatively lean too. It's myself and a deputy chief, Tom Lillard. The ability, I think, to address crime in the community in an effective way over the course of time, it really goes down to the detective bureau and making sure that those guys are aggressive and following up cases, following up crime patterns, and kind of tracking people to where they want to go. The rubber meets the road with the patrol. 72% of our officers, those are the guys that answer the 911 calls and take care of anything that's kind of in progress. The detectives kind of come in afterwards, and anything that doesn't get solved at that initial response is then their purview to continue forward. So just getting right down to the numbers. So we report through the FBI all sorts of offense codes, but I always take the ones that I think that are most relevant to me if I was living in a community or that impacts directly kind of our feeling of safety and security. And so I've always brought it, down to these offenses, residential burglary, burglaries, auto thefts, general thefts. It's just kind of a benchmark, and then, robberies. Residential burglaries, probably for the first time since, in decades, we only had one residential burglary, in town last year. That's a number that's like, incredibly low, and unheard of. And the reason that as we go through subsequent charts on crime trends, I'm not actually kind of like pointing that out more, like here, because that number is so low, and actually 23 was pretty low too, we're using a 5-year average to kind of do trending. I'm not necessarily a superstitious guy, but it appears to me that if I was like, look, we had one residential burglary in 12 months, you know, that we'd have like 2 before I left the meeting. So I appreciate the fact that that's like an outlier. And, you know, the numbers in these like more important categories are small enough that, you know, they're open to fluctuation. So that's why I look at crime trends over time, and I think they're kind of more telling of where we have to put our resources and what we need to do. Burglary to autos, the last 3 years, and again, the only reason that I averaged these on 5 years is some of these numbers were just very low last year. But burglary to autos, I mean, also again, very low last year, down to 14. The average in a 5-year average is about 24. Vehicle thefts, we had 7, kind of in line for what we're seeing in the last 3 years. These thefts is kind of a deceiving number, because a lot of these thefts are actually reports that have to do, if you remember, like that 120, it is driving higher than these last 3 years. If you remember, 4 or 5 years ago, there were all of these IRS scams going on when people were filing their taxes. That led to these kind of huge numbers of police reports that kind of skewed up that number. So the thefts weren't actually happening in Hinsdale, but everybody needed reports that got victimized for like documentation purposes. So that number is relatively constant, but I just caution that because I don't think the theft is a good barometer of like crime or safety in town, because a lot of it has to do with internet scams. You know, somebody realized that they had an issue with one of their bank accounts. They sent a check someplace that never got there. Maybe it got washed with cash somewhere else. So it doesn't necessarily, that category doesn't necessarily affect, it affects the people in town, but it doesn't necessarily affect things that are going on in the community. And then robberies, relatively stable, 2 in 2022, nothing in 2023, and then 1 in 2024. And as we go through the individual crimes, we'll get to what those are. Oh, there it is. Now, if you recall, last time I was here, which I think was actually 2 years ago, we had more of a pattern of residential burglaries and overnight burglaries. I didn't break them up into separate maps just because the numbers are so low. Well, like the home burglaries, there's 1. So this is the auto burglary, overnight auto burglary pattern last year in 2024, and that auto theft pattern actually mirrors that. So it ebbs and flows over time based on who's active and who's not active, but it roughly hits almost every neighborhood in the community. With the exception, probably the neighborhoods that are impacted the least are up at the northwest part of town. But it's really just a function of geography. Like south of the tracks, if we're taking hits there, they're coming in off 47th Street or 55th, occasionally up County Line Road when we have contact with them. And then if you're up in this northeast quadrant, it's usually offenders that are getting off that expressway coming right down Ogden and then pulling. So we run Ogden pretty heavy at night. So I mean, if you're an offender and you have some familiarity with the community, the farther you go down that road, the more likely you're gonna have like an unwanted contact with an officer. So I think if they come into the community to do crime, sometimes they'll just turn sooner rather than later as they're rolling through. So this is 12-year comparisons. What does this look like? Residential burglaries were routinely a 3-year average, so 2010, 2011, 2012, we were averaging about 15 residential burglaries a year. Currently, if you go a 3-year average, we're closer to 6 residential burglaries a year. Vehicle burglaries, the same. The 3-year average was higher. We're averaging in about a 3-year period, about 38 auto burglaries a year. Now in 2024, going 22, 23, 24, we average out at about 18 a year. So those have also gone down, but those vehicle burglaries also tend to fluctuate. Vehicle thefts. So the biggest change, if you take long-term like crime analysis in Hinsdale, is prior to 10 years ago, you weren't getting these overnight auto thefts. And prior to 10 years ago, not just at Hinsdale, but like in the southeast quadrant of DuPage County, the armed robberies were very, very low, and some years now non-existent. You are starting to get some, but they're still in the area relatively low. So I've lived with my wife in the west suburbs here I think we moved in there 26 years ago. And I had no idea until I moved out here how low the residential burglaries are here. So I mean, if you look at the greater Chicago metropolitan area, excuse me, in the suburbs, I never really tracked burglaries by my own house. But when I came here, I was surprised that these numbers were so low. But you don't have public transportation. There's no L line, there's no, when I was working the North Shore, there was a good number of burglaries that would simply come right off, walking off the L station. You don't have that dynamic here. You don't have the same type of crime patterns that follow like a metro station than you would in public transit. And then it's a function of just based on accessibility. How close are you to expressways that go in and out of the city? We're far enough off to 290 and the 55, so that it probably affects us in a less, less significant way than those towns that are right off the edge. So just breaking it down other way, this is from average out from 210, 211, 212. Again, we're still in the teens on resburgs, auto burglaries, maybe mid-30s. If you jump 10 years ahead, the numbers really are not perceptively changed for auto burglaries and residential burglaries. If you go the last 3 years, though, you see this trending down in res burglaries. And then the same thing with auto burglary. The difference, again, is vehicle thefts. I'm told that the previous police chief told me that these overnight auto thefts used to be completely unheard of here in town. And now they're kind of, they're pervasive throughout the Chicago metropolitan area. I mean, every single town in DuPage County gets hit with them at one point or another. And then the armed robberies, still numbers are very, very low, but they do occasionally occur. And we'll look at the last 3 of those from the last 3-year cycle.
I feel like I should know this, but what's the difference between burglary, theft, and robbery?
All right, so a burglary, well, actually, it'll go right through the slides here. Residential burglary, which is that top category that I charge, is if somebody's going into somebody's house. Even if that house is unlocked or locked with the intent to commit a theft. So most of them are unlocked houses. There's really 3 types that occur in town. In DuPage County, the DuPage County part of town, if you have an attached garage, a car's taken out of it, they'll charge that out as a res burglary because it's attached. Cook County, they wouldn't charge that out as necessarily a res burglary. You have to be in the living quarters for that to get a charge. But it's generally either force or no force where items are taken out of a home. Roost burglaries, we were very low on last year, but those things ebb and flow over time. They're usually perpetrated by traveling groups of individuals that'll hit multiple cities in like a large geographic area. So they could be hitting like the suburbs of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a couple days a week, come back down, be bedding down in like one of these motels, and then hit around like DuPage or town. Those things have been relatively low lately, not to jinx myself. The one burglary that we had from 2024 was in that neighborhood very close to Lake Oak School. And that was an international group of guys. It was an organized group of individuals that came through California. We were able to execute some search warrants on where they were staying locally. We're not as of yet able to recover any of the property, but that's like an organized crime group. They're going for like very big houses. They typically do not hit Hinsdale because the houses don't sit on enough property. So like if you look at the region, they tend to like favor towns that have like bigger expanses of property, or they'll hit subdivisions that back up to like golf courses or forest preserves. If you remember last year, I think I'll put out an alert, and somebody was home during one of these burglaries, and we chased the guys through Fullersburg. That would have been the exact same individuals. So they're not bedded down here anywhere in the Chicago area. They're kind of travelers, but it's an organized crime activity. So they're going for high-end stuff. They'll bring enough equipment to do a safe right inside a home. And then they'll, by the time the police are investigating it, your property is probably getting shipped off to California. The eventual destination for that particular group is South America. But it just seems to like percolate up from like the California area, and then it just comes all the way to the East Coast as far as like New York, New York to New Jersey, Ohio, and then it swings back down around the Midwest.
Are they from a particular country? Did you guys know?
No. Police strategies. In any residential burglaries is pattern analysis, and then putting out crime prevention messages. So like over the course of time, not last year, but over the course of time, most burglaries occur like at dusk. Most burglaries occur here in town in the fall, making sure your house looks lived in. Or if you're gone for the evening, you leave some lights on so it doesn't appear to be attractive if somebody's driving up and down the street. Everything we do, our burglary strategy though, is based on, we track patterns. And then figuring out what types of burglaries are being caused in the greater metropolitan area. See how they would potentially relate to Hinsdale, and then just doing a daytime analysis. If there's particular nights of the week or evenings of the week that we would be more susceptible to getting hit, we'll put some covert cars out there in neighborhoods that they tend to like. In burglars, I've spent a lot of my career like tracking burglary crews. They get like very, very, there's some guys that will not hit like big houses because they get lost in them and they can't tell if somebody's there. And there's other, so they'll like hit, ranches and bungalows. And some of these burglars, just from working them for years after we catch them, they have a comfort. They have a comfort level on how close to the expressway they want to be, or if it's off public trans, how close to the public trans line they want to be. They have a comfort level of what time of the day they want to travel. They just become like very, very MO-driven creatures, and following those patterns, even if we can't put a name on it, kind of helps us like at least track it down and do some preventive stuff. That is really the biggest difference I've seen in crime in my career. It used to be, if you had a burglary pattern, it was proximate to the community. like the offenders, it would be unusual if your offender lived outside of maybe an 8 mile radius of that community. Yeah, but now you've got, it's really the proliferation of a cell phone. That these kids like will go out and they'll just research places off the internet. And they travel. Going back to this burglary map, that's over. If this is the right way to go back. So we have 5 of these in a year. And and they're right off that 55th and County Line corridor. So like the current cases that have occurred since January 1 of 2025. I have a high degree of confidence that we're gonna solve those with an arrest because we're making some good progress. But some of the guys that have hit in this neighborhood in the past are living, address to address. They're living as far as 25 miles away outside the community. I mean, they're taking a drive. So, the days in the 90s where, your burglars were proximate to like, you just start pulling parole sheets from like neighboring communities and working your way out. It's different now. I mean, crime is way more transient than it ever was, especially in the last decade. Auto thefts and auto burglaries. So I know that the numbers are still relatively low, but it's mostly a overnight activity. Interestingly enough, this pattern started as a public trans activity. So like the first crews that would go out, this is like very rudimentary. They're just looking they're going into nicer neighborhoods where they believe people are less prone to locking things and removing their car keys, and they're just looking for these high-end cars to take. Sometimes they sell them on street sales, but more often than not, they're just using them to commit other crimes in the larger Chicago metropolitan area. But this, when it started, it ran for years, is like a CPA pattern. When I was working up north, when we had these guys hitting us, they were always coming off the L train. And if we were sitting on a station, maybe they got off the station earlier, it was substantially an L pattern. And if you've ever read that book, The Tipping Point, there was this one particular occasion where we had lost a car. We went down to find it. We recovered it, and then we located another car in that same street from north suburb, like a far north suburb, like one of the Berrylands or something. We contacted the police department to see if it's stolen. They went and checked the house, and it was in fact stolen. And so when we brought the individuals back to the station, we started asking, hey, what's up with this Barrett? And the young man actually said, we've determined that no rich people lock anything. So they took the L to like the north end of the line, grabbed a couple cars from like Evanston and Wilmette, and then took those cars to go farther out. And those guys saturated Lake County before they came out west to DuPage and started hitting like Burridge and Will. But so we're still seeing residual effects of that pattern. But luxury cars are targeted. So what we do is we kind of track when the patterns are active. We track, where those cars end up before we actually start losing one. So if there's a pattern of auto thefts in DuPage County, we kind of look to see where they're going in the city. And those are the neighborhoods that then become the focus of our attention when we start losing cars, or if we start losing cars. So traditionally, cars that are stolen in the southeast side of the city, well, even up in the northeast end, probably come down to, they probably end up in less than half a dozen Chicago neighborhoods, the same Chicago neighborhoods all the time. And there's just there's just like a pipeline, but if you come back, hey, a couple years ago, I think we had a Bentley stolen. You come back into a neighborhood where you're driving a car that's actually worth more than the houses in that block. And you start saying like these these kids are not as like sophisticated as you would think. They know what exit to get off, they know how they traveled to a community, but they couldn't necessarily tell you like specifically what town they were in. When they did something, they just know that they came down 55th or they came down 47th to get here. But, part of the reason that we kind of want to nip these patterns start for Hinsdale is that, if you let it run a little bit, you're gonna double your auto thefts in a very, very short period of time. So the strategy for the police department is to immediately recover that car as quickly as possible. So we'll usually go to neighborhoods that are hot and do print searches and then just try to deny the person the use of that vehicle. When there's things going on, when we see patterns come alive, we encourage residents to lock their cars and remove their key fob. So the last 2 times we've sent out alerts through Facebook and the crime alerts, one was like 3 weeks ago that said, hey, please reminder to lock your cars and take your fobs in each and every night. There's always like a couple people that contact me and say like, why do you keep putting that out? Like, hey, don't you, how does that help? There's always a reason. Like if you see that coming out from the police department, it's because we're watching a pattern that's kind of going towards Hinsdale. So like the last 2 crime alerts we put out of that nature, one earlier this year, I mean, we lost a car the next night. And then we put one out 2 weeks ago or 2.5 weeks ago. And then, Western Springs lost 2 cars there. So we don't like, it's not like we're sitting in the office saying like, hey, we haven't posted anything. But we can't, a lot of times we're acting on an analysis of reports and intelligence. So it's not like we can say that, hey, so-and-so just got stopped in a car, that person was connected with the Hinsdale case, that case was connected with an auto theft. We don't have that, like, can't go into that level of detail, but like, if we're putting something out, it's because we see something happening. And we just want to alert residents to come through. We're big on then just processing the car as much as we can to kind of connect it to an individual. And then we take a task force approach to these most prolific crews. So the high year for us was 2019, 2020. We were losing like 15 cars a year. I mean, so overnights. We ended up just going heavy with bringing in some other towns that were also being affected, and then identifying the 7 most prolific individuals that we thought were kind of running these crews. And then we just put a lot of work to put cases in on those guys. We executed 2 search warrants simultaneously in Dalton and South Holland. Recovered 4 firearms. Some of those firearms had been used in homicides in the city of Chicago. But more importantly, we were able to charge them out in DuPage County, which you're going to get a detention in DuPage County. You're going to get a prison sentence in DuPage County. And that one arrest, that one effort took our auto theft numbers from 14 in 1 year down to 5 now. So we're still kind of living in that lull, but it's also, it's really like time and space. So like the individuals that got arrested with the Western Springs job, they're in the same neighborhoods, they're in the same blocks of people that we previously arrested, but it's almost like that younger generation of kids, evolving up. The reason why we spent a lot of time talking about these overnight auto thefts is because it's not just an auto theft. Like, more often than not, these guys are armed with guns, and usually it's the individual closest to the street that's in kind of an overwatch position that's holding a gun, if you can see it close to us. When we make arrests of these cases, when we recover cars, we're often recovering guns. So the caution that we do to the community is if you see activity in your driveway in the middle of the night, these things occur between 1 a.m. and sunup. You just call the police and let us take care of it. Because a lot of times they're just really young. They're kind of stupid, might even be high. And then, but they're also, they've got these, this proliferation of guns is just crazy. And the number of guns we've recovered in this case, these cases are relatively high too. So it's not just an auto theft. So I think it's like an act of citizenship. If you lock your cars and keep your fobs out, even if we don't detect somebody coming into the community, if they can't score here, but then they go to another community and they can score in 15 or 20 minutes, they're gonna keep going back where they can find items. And in the past, we've talked to individuals that have said, hey, at 20 minutes, I was walking around for 20 minutes shaking door handles that I went back with a Porsche SUV. I mean, that's just going to encourage like 3 or 4 more guys coming up, in the next like 2 or 3 weeks. And it's not, it's not that we recover most of the cars. So it's not really the nuisance of losing your car. Although you're gonna be swimming in like red light tickets for the next like 3 weeks. It's like everybody would get the car back. They're blowing through lights like crazy in that like south side of the city. So it's not just the nuisance of that. It's more of the danger that the individual brings to the community by being armed. And then having somebody have this like chance encounter with them at 2 or 3 in the morning that is why we consider this a significant impact on community safety. You got a question there?
Yeah. Couple questions. I'm blanking, there was still in the car park. What was that car?
Catalytic converter.
Oh, that-
Yeah, that is dubbed way down. But
Okay.
that also is regional. So like one of the catalytic converter thefts we had off Colonial Gardens three years ago in the summer. We ended up chasing that car down 83. Those offenders, like the previous night, were like chased out of Rogers Park. So that's the farthest north you can go in the city and the neighborhood. And unfortunately, I don't know, my guess is that the market went down for that. Because we're just not,
Were they tracing like stolen ones they were trying to
I
sell?
think it comes down to the market. I think the market just went down for that, where guys are not going out to do that activity. But we were hit with a few of those. They didn't really touch residential neighborhoods. We had a couple midday ones in the office park. Yeah, and then we had some that were interrupted right in that, like, I think it was almost the parking lot to Colonial Gardens, if I remember correctly. But we picked up the car, we chased it, we ended up terminating it, at some point, because it was like over 100 miles an hour going down 83.
But that you don't get too much breaking of windows of cars or hot wiring and everything.
Nobody hot wires anymore. Unless you're in like a very high-end vehicle that has got like a reprogrammer, but it's specific to certain brands. Like the Jeeps for a while were getting reprogrammed with some level of regularity. People weren't coming to Hinsdale for Jeeps. So we really weren't seeing that pattern. We were watching it regionally, but we weren't getting affected by that. And then the only other auto burglaries that we tend to get in town, but it goes up and down. Ironically, I had one when I was walking over here, I heard one on the radio, is and it's also a regional pattern. Where guys will smash out a window if they see a purse inside, but those are proximate, those are daytime events, and they're proximate to parking lots. And they tend to hit like churches, cemeteries, and then they're really big at hitting these like exercise places, whether it's a rec center or like an advertised like commercial property. And we occasionally get those. When those occur, generally within the hour, there's an identity theft that occurs, in one of these larger box stores, like a Target or a Walmart. So I think the last one we had in town was at KLM. Somebody left the person while they were walking the dog. It was a smash out, and I think before the vehicle owner actually got back to realize their car was burglarized, that those cars were being used at the Walmart and the Hodgkins. Now, we did arrest people on that pattern, but we didn't arrest, I don't think we arrested the individuals that were necessarily responsible for that particular case. Just sometimes we can trace their activity through phones and whatnot. So, but it's a crew that it ebbs and flows over time. But KLM and that daycare center right off of Monroe and I think it's been hit once. Armed robberies, very, very, very low incident, not just in Hinsdale, in southeast DuPage. Like the northern part of Cook County is not a hotbed of criminal activity, but like the numbers of burglaries were significantly higher, the numbers of robberies were higher. So like even coming out here, the incidence of robberies in this town and in southeast DuPage are relatively low. But I think it's proximity. It's proximity to where the offenders are coming from and how they travel. So we had none in 2023. We had 2 in 2024. One was a postal worker. You know, those keys that the postal workers use, they're worth like $11,000 on the street. Like if somebody goes and, which is why you see occasionally in the news, you see these postal workers getting robbed. But the evidence would indicate that the guys came and actually just followed one of our postal employees. And I figured out his route and then came back the next day and robbed them. That case has been indicted. And I think in the next week or two, you'll probably see a press release coming out of the state's attorney's office. We identified the offenders in that and recovered the evidence from search warrants relatively quickly. Because it's a postal employee, it takes a little longer because, you know, the feds have to waive off of it first before the state can charge it. So either can charge, but the feds have the right to charge it initially, but it looks like the DuPage County State's Attorney will take this one. But that got charged, and then the Verizon store robbery also from 2022. And those individuals were responsible for a series of robberies, mostly in the north side of the city. Like Uptown, Lakeview, like closer to like Lincoln Park. But they had come out here at closing and robbed the Verizon store on First Street. Because we had been watching the pattern, we had visited that store a week earlier and told them, hey, there's these patterns of store robbery. So, you know, based on that, when the property went out the door, we were able to track it. And using a helicopter, we brought it down to the south suburbs. We watched the helicopter, watched it go into a building, and then we were able to hit it with a search warrant. So we were able to make arrests. I think that guy's been sentenced. I don't remember what he got, but it would have been double digits in DuPage County. And shockingly, you know, he was out on bond for, I mean, the exact same thing, doing the robbery of the phone stores. There's this crazy thing, you know, the Safety Act had some benefits to law enforcement. Like, you know, the fact that we have body cams now is based on that Safety Act. Huge benefit to law enforcement, huge benefit to law enforcement. There's some other things that have actually been beneficial out of that Safety Act. One of the crazy things coming out of Springfield related to that Safety Act was this thing that if you're on electronic monitor, you get 2 days off a week to like go to church, find a job, whatever. And so like if you're, and then you can be AWOL for 24 hours and the police cannot charge you or petition to have you charged for violating the terms. And so like these guys that came to rob the store, they were on bracelets for, wait for it, armed robberies in stores. But like one of the crazy pieces of legislation coming out of Springfield is like, we're unable to charge them with a violation of a bail bond or anything. Because you're allowed to have 2 days off on a monitor. So that, I mean, it just makes no sense whatsoever, but that's one of the byproducts of that. So we kind of worked those aggressively, involved executing search warrants outside the community and putting together stronger cases for prosecution. The only one in 2024 was a robbery. It was not an armed robbery. It was a woman gassing a car at the BP Amoco station midday. It was a group of individuals that are actually, I think they were tied to like 50 different cases. We were the only case that kind of bled into DuPage County. We were able to recover the car right away. We were able to take some people into custody that were persons of interest, but I don't think like those offenders have not been charged. To like some of these cases, there's like a progression where it's going to eventually happen. You know, they're masked up reasonably. I don't know who they were in that like larger scheme. But that was kind of an audacious hit too, though, because it was also, you know, it was right midday. But if you looked at all of their cases, I mean, they started working at like 11 o'clock in the morning. You know, and they try to get a car. Other burglaries is just the catch-all category. 2024, again, this is very low for us. We just went down to 1, averaged it out to 14. These are very similar to what we were talking about with these residential burglaries. You know, with the exception of the burglaries that we had 2023 in that business district. Some of those were local juvenile offenders, not local, not Hinsdale kids, but like proximate to the community. Unlike some of these other ones that occur, they're part of these much larger patterns. So if you watch the news, you'll notice that there's like all sorts of reports of these like street burglary smash outs in the middle of the night where towns are getting hit 15 or 20 times. So that's like a regional pattern that's kind of currently going on that affects Lake County, DuPage, just went into Will County. But I mean, that started in the north side of the city. They were killing those north neighborhoods in the city of Chicago for a while. So, I mean, our strategy is we just watch patterns. So when that proliferation picks up or the activity picks up in DuPage County, our activity will pick up along that Ogden Avenue corridor. So an example of this is the dealership burglary crews that we had operating back in 2022. I mean, those dealership burglaries, I think, 200. You know, they went a little farther. They were out as far, I think, as McHenry County, but I mean the whole Chicago metro area. But we were able to box them in and arrest 3 individuals back in 2022, and at least in the DuPage County area, that things died down. And I think the one protagonist there, the guy that was probably running that particular crew based on his history, I think from memory, he pulled like 16 years from our DuPage County judge, which is really high for a commercial burglary. When we were testing this system, because there's a live feed, there's all sorts of feedback. So I'll play this for you. It's some when this is over, but this was just a little clip of that arrest going down. You know, interestingly enough, though, that car gets boxed in, and that's a juvenile. Like as he's standing feet away from the police officer, you know, as close as the front row is to me, and you know, he's pulling a gun out while he's doing it. And you know, the officers telling him not to do it. You know, luckily he was safely taken into custody. But some of these regional crimes, I mean, the difference we see is the firearms, and these are some of the firearms the individuals had on that night. And this car, stolen auto, you know, from an overnight pattern, not an overnight pattern in Hinsdale. You can see it was peppered with bullet holes. You know, based on some other nonsense activity they got involved in. So burglaries, auto thefts, and robberies tend to be part of larger regional patterns. And that's really the most significant change I've seen in the course of my career. I mean, most of my time was spent doing criminal investigations. If you worked a robbery pattern before, I mean, it was proximate to maybe like a, you know, an 8, maybe a 10-mile ring, your guy was in there. And now you can have some of these robbery patterns, they'll do 20, 30 miles. Sometimes they'll cross into Indiana, sometimes they'll cross over the border to Wisconsin, much larger regional patterns. So law enforcement success, our success in Hinsdale in prevention and detection is tied directly to our ability to kind of read and project crime patterns that occur in the community. So when the residential burglary patterns start picking up, our profile in the community is different. You know, you're not necessarily gonna perceive it as, we'll probably go a little with a covert vehicle as opposed to a marked vehicle. But when when these business burglaries pick up, you know, our profile in that area of town is gonna be a little different. And the same thing when you get these alerts on these overnight auto thefts. You know, these are very, and I wanna stress, right, you know, the phrase that they, Hinsdale is a low crime community. It's not a no crime community. I mean, when you look at crime compared to living this close to a large metropolitan area, crime rate here is very low, very low. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, we must be attentive to this pattern. And these auto thefts, you know, they're not just a nuisance, because you see that too. Sometimes we'll put out a notice about an auto theft arrest. Somebody will write back, you know, why you spend time if somebody doesn't lock their doors. It's got nothing to do with the car. I mean, the car's significant, but it really, the larger picture is we want to discourage people from coming through the community that have sometimes pretty heavy histories and like we driving up and down the street in the middle of the night. You know, crimes of opportunity. We didn't do this last year, but trends, I know also if you look at read the press, I think the neighborhood police chief has gone out a couple of these days around record to try to get the legislation changed around fleeing and eluding. The numbers are high. We maxed out at about 30 on 2021. I think last year we hit 15, but the proliferation of like fleeing and eluding the police probably in the last 8 to 10 years has gone up pretty dramatically. We always look at the safeguard of the community on whether or not we want to engage somebody and for how long and what we'll do with that car. And then we count if we're in an active attempt to stop the car and they're not stopping. You know, whether it's a quarter mile or 2 miles, we document it because we study it and we use it for training. So I'm kind of a data guy. You know, the time of day, the location in town, what crime pattern it kind of ties to. So, you know, some communities, you know, you look at these numbers and if they make it an attempt and they're a quarter or half mile down the road and the officer decides he's not going to do anything, they don't necessarily consider it to be in a pursuit. We actually document everything just for kind of for training purposes. And it becomes a good baseline to figure out, you know, the prevalence of these other types of crimes. If I can get this plate for you later off this other system, I'll do it, but I just brought you a little clip of one of our officers throwing spikes at a car that was running from us on one particular night. We do utilize spike strips when people are fleeing. We can get a car in front of it. It's probably the most effective way to safely take people into custody. There's my phrase that pays again. Hinsdale's a low crime community, not a no crime community. I mean, even the western suburbs, like the southeast DuPage, the numbers, whether you're looking at Resburgs, robberies, and even some of these auto thefts, the numbers are still low compared to the Chicago metropolitan area. Probably based on a benefit of the geography and how far off the city we're located, no public trans coming through. But that doesn't mean that we're not attentive to what is occurring. you know. But so like kind of these baseline numbers, I mean, having a residential burglary of one last year is just like incredibly low. You know, I did not spend my career in a high crime neighborhood, but you know, when I was working burglaries, we'd get 60 to 100 a year. I mean, these numbers out here are low, they're low. If we put out bulletins though on these Resbergs, it's the same as the overnight. We're watching a pattern. You know, and it's just, we want you to be more attentive. Overnight burglaries and auto thefts fluctuate based on regional trends. So even though we're low now, relatively low now, I think we got 5 of these overnight auto burglaries on the year. You know, it really depends on, you know, who's coming back into the system, who's coming out of jail, and you know, even if they come to a neighboring community and they score big, it'll tend to bring them back, you know, to this geographic area. Which is why the aggressiveness in kind of pursuing these criminal investigations ends up being important. I mean, you look at that impact of that one case they used where we were hitting 14, and then we brought it down to 4 or 5 the next year. I mean, that was based on one arrest count. Sometimes, you know, we'll have this differentiation between part of the towns in Cook, obviously. Most of the town is in DuPage County. Sometimes people will occasionally ask, you know, what county am I in at the time of the arrest? Well, most guys don't operate. You know, there's like, there was some individuals who were trying to explain that they were in DuPage County. And the kid thought he was in Indiana, just like when you drive down the Eisenhower. And you go south, unlike the Eisenhower, south of 294, the sign says Indiana. So, you know, sometimes we're trying to teach somebody a boundary and they don't even know what state they're in. So it's hard to imagine, but we have had adults. A couple of years ago, we had a guy one of our midnight officers saw a suspicious vehicle pull into a driveway. He did not know who lived there, but he knew that he had never seen that car in that particular driveway before. It's like 2 a.m. So he boxed it in and he ends up getting a gun off a guy. And I don't think he was like gonna do anything at that house. I think he saw that officer coming down the street and just decided that, like, I'll get you away here. But like, you know, as he's getting walked back to the squad, he was like, hey, am I Cook or DuPage? And the officer's like, oh, you're in DuPage County. Okay, let's out an expert. Because you're gonna get help. You're gonna get help. You know, DuPage County, that thrown out to the state's attorney, Bob Berlind, there's like a level of aggressiveness in his office that leads to some significant outcomes. I mean, if you look at the car dealerships, guys getting that one guy getting 16 years. That's some aggressive prosecution, but it's not just the state's attorney's office, it's also the judiciary in DuPage County. Where if you put these cases up, they're actually kind of taking them seriously. So we're not immune to regional crime trends, but when they do occur, especially like the significant things, we've got a very good track record at clearing them and getting the responsible people into custody. I pasted on the back wall, a QR code, if you want to take a look at our annual report. I don't think Nina's got like the current one up, but we have the last one that does the same like kind of trending or, and I think as a matter of fact, I think there's links to the video that I was going to show you here in those annual report. So this is the question period of the presentation. Which ran a little long.
You haven't made any specific mention of drugs, sale, use, contribution to other problems.
There's not like, at a different point in my career, drugs were kind of fueling the residential burglary patterns. we're just not getting chunky burglaries, right?
Mhm.
We're just not getting it. In terms of, you know, I've been here 8 years, for the first 4 years. We were averaging, well, I think when we did a 5-year analysis, we were averaging, an opiate death every year in a 20-something category. Right, not to jinx ourselves. Well, we've gone 3 years without an opiate death. So that, if you recall, back when we were having more overdose related to like, opiates and specifically heroin, we were going around hitting community groups and churches, pushing a prevention message and getting people. So it's not that we're immune from that. We're still probably administering Narcan in the community. I don't specifically know what the numbers were last year, but my guess is we're still probably giving Narcan to somebody to reverse the flow of an opiate at least 8 times a year. But that's also been training. It's also been training. So, and we've tried to get a little aggressive with that, because the opiate deaths that have occurred since I've been here, not always been a surprise. You recognize the individual, you know they've been in and out of treatment programs. Maybe we've gone and done some sort of intervention in the past. So we've worked with the community house in the past. We've worked with different drug programs to, like, you know, get some treatment options. But the bottom line is, if you're in your 20s, you got to decide you want help. I mean, there's very little that we can do to force that help on them. But when we were tracking, when we had a record of those, I think I'm going from memory now from these old presentations. I think the median age was like 24 something. And that is not inconsistent with what we were getting in the northern part of Cook County. And if you want, DuPage County Health actually tracks those countywide. They actually produce a pretty good reports in DuPage County on you know, the prevalence of opiates and deaths, especially with fentanyl. When I was a police chief in the northern part of Cook County, to get that data, I was relying on the benevolence of the local emergency. So what we would do is we'd approach the hospitals and say, like, hey, we don't need any patient information, but you take these zip codes and tell us how many times you treated somebody for like an overdose. And that was the only way we got to establish a baseline. Because if you're gonna run prevention programs, you want to be able to at least see what kind of impact you're having. And at least in DuPage County, they track it for every municipality.
Narcan training a couple years ago at middle school, and they gave us Narcan. You know if that stuff is still good? Or all what's
No, that stuff expires.
That's my question. You do another training?
Do you remember? I remember stopping in there. Do you remember who was running that? Was it the DuPage County?
Oh, it's a bunch of different, you know, agencies or people there.
I think you can still get the, I think you can still get it, but at least the Narcan that they give us in our squad cars, I know they're changing that thing out a couple times a year, but also in a police car, if it's not temperature controlled, apparently it affects the effectiveness of it. So.
How do you get the community alerts that you send out? Is it by residential phone numbers, or is it on a website or village?
If you at any point you use Facebook,
Okay,
all right, we'll get you some other alert mechanism.
okay, it's not on the.
But like it seems like most people that respond, we push something out like on our Facebook page because it's almost immediate.
Oh, on your,
Yeah,
yeah,
and then we try not to, everybody's got like a different flavor. I try to not put you know, nonsense on there. Like if we're sending you an alert, it's because it's relevant.
Right, well, I'm just from a community that, you know, you get Amber alerts and community alerts. And you could sign up for it, those are, you know, so, you know, it was very helpful.
Okay, there is a village alert system. I'll look that up for you. But most of what we push out is on Facebook.
Okay.
Where I live in Western Springs, I've got some sort of alert system. I never realized how many times they have water main break. It seems like every time that's going on, so it's almost nice if you can, I probably just didn't spend enough time doing it. But I'm sure there's a way you could filter it.
Those are my tourists, so we used to get them, but only most important ones.
Yeah.
They were crazy, but when you're going up, you pay attention.
Yeah. Any other questions?
So I hope we're not changing, but the e-scooters,
Mhm.
yes.
I figured that there was gonna be a
Oh
question.
my
on that,
God,
So I
it's-
brought a pen.
I saw.
Yeah, but it's a little off topic tonight, but so that,
When is this going to affect? I thought it was like May 15th, the new law.
yeah, but this,
Yeah.
our ordinance. I think we had the second week of that, but I think our ordinance is effective now.
Okay.
So that is brand new. To encompass those changes that were approved by the village board,
Okay, great.
would have been two meetings ago.
Okay.
But you know, just a caution, that like, I know these e-scooters, components. You know, we first started doing enforcement last year when the ordinance first got adopted. I was kind of surprised to learn that better than half of our staffs were not people from Hinsdale. They were from individuals that kind of lived in,
Like Willowbrook?
well, they're individuals
Like
that lived in
Casey?
towns that had like no, like downtown areas. So
Okay.
like, one of the surprising things
Yeah.
for us, for at least in checking the new bikes, was that I had no idea how prevalent like the community was from e-bikers from other areas. Which is significant because, you know, our biggest push for education was through the school system. And if half of those violators don't touch one of our schools, you know, that message is not necessarily going out to them. But also, just some people are kind of upset that there's like, an enforcement component to this. It really comes down to a parenting issue. You could put as much ordinance as you want out there. I mean, some of these bikes do 40, 50 miles an hour.
And they're running right through stop signs.
Yeah, and if you put
Sure.
it's not a good idea putting a 13-year-old on a bike
Yeah.
that's that fast. You know, even at some point. You gotta get the parents to agree that you can't leave that parenting component to the village to handle, because it's gonna be done very, very inconsistently. I mean, you have officers that have other duties in town, they're on accident reports, they're on domestic. They're taking reports, they're not just solely focused on these e-bikes, so we do the best we can, but if you're looking for police department to solve the e-bike issue, it's not gonna happen. You
Oh,
gotta-
I think
Parents
it's
have got
100%.
yeah, the parents have got to really kind of take and my youngest is 13. And, you know, I've done the same thing, like, hey, my friends all have, you know, these electric bikes, and it's like, getting free opportunity to get exercise, but they don't have. It's different, it's different if you're like in a vacation spot.
Right, so just one kind of, so it must be 18, so I know the other morning.
On the scooter.
On the scooter, right,
Yeah.
one flew, of course, didn't stop on 8th in Washington, was flying towards the middle school at 7:15 in the morning. Will, like 181, who does not have 15, 16, or 17-year-olds on their campus, will they be outlawing those bikes to be brought to school?
I do not know, because I know there was a conversation, they have been very, they were very, very good with us. With doing the push out for the education and training for the students when this initially came up last year. I know somebody else has suggested that to them, I just don't know where they're at.
Okay.
And then I have quarterly meetings with the superintendent, but we're like way behind in this particular quarter, I've never actually ask them, but I know knew that was like one of their suggestions.
What happens if one of these children dents your car
Yeah.
or hits an individual walking across the street? Who's responsible? You?
No, it's still an accident report.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, it would go to their parents. Yeah. And you know, we're not trying to be too heavy-handed, like the bikes that are clearly illegal. You get, you're warned the first time, your parent has to pick you up on the bike, the second time, we write the ticket to the parent. And I think, now don't quote me on this, Ken, his feelings in the back row here, it'd be better to quote Lily. But I think when I asked Lily what the average fine of that has been in the courthouse, I thought he said like in the $250 range. But I don't know what that's going through. But you know, most times if we stop somebody, we have contact with the parent, there's a level of compliance afterwards, which is what we're looking for. So it's unusual to have like that contact, parental involvement, no compliance, and those are really the people that we're sending this for. Any other questions at all?
So I'm just curious, the cameras that people put on their property or if they're tenants somewhere, the surveillance cameras. Do you get any complaints about it? Is there like something about invasion of privacy and creepiness?
As long as it's not going into a window, if
Well,
it's.
I know that this has been like the law. But the thing is, for example, if you live very close to your neighbors, they
Mhm.
can see your ins and outs, like call the police if they see someone who's just visiting and just, it's a nuisance.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, like, is there anything, like, is anybody even talking about it or people
No.
are just?
No,
just-
occasionally we will
Yeah.
get like some concern about a camera from neighbor to neighbor, and we handle it like we would handle any other like neighbor dispute. We'd probably talk to both parties and try to get some sort of resolution. But and we can mediate those. But you know, I like the cameras in the driveways because, you know, it allows us to, you know, sometimes these guys, like the photos I showed you earlier, they're masked up. But we get a good clean, you know, building description,
Yeah.
shoe description. And then if we take them to a neighborhood, we could possibly get them someplace where they're not masked up. But then we can match the clothing up. So it's hard for me to bad talk cameras because we use them.
So
so
that's the
expensive.
thing is because if it's on your property and the cameras are like on your driveway and then that's your call.
Yeah.
But if you can see across and when your neighbors, because you have 1, 2, it's just too much and
Well, if you have a specific instance, talk to me offline.
I
And
can't.
we'll take off. You know. Anything else? It's really hard for me to bad talk cameras though, because so many people that give us like,
It's just so easy for anyone to say like, it's
Yeah.
for my safety and
Yeah.
then that makes.
no, I understand that. I
That
appreciate that.
makes like my safety like not an issue anymore.
Yeah.
Is there anything we need from the community that we wish we had more of?
No, I gotta tell you that the village board here, ever since I've come here, has been very, very, very simple. You know, there's, we get everything we need to like aggressively, competently run through. And even if we go through a crime pattern where I wanna put additional officers on an overnight watch or additional officers, I mean, that overtime is not, an impediment. Like this village board, ever since I've been here, everybody I've served with, it's just been very supportive of the place. Now, we still consider ourselves to be stewards of people's money, like, we're not gonna start like using resources that we would find to be unnecessary. Because if we go to the board and we ask them for something, we want that level of credibility that like, hey, we reasonably need this for now. So, but no, we don't, this community, the elected officials are very, very supportive. And the same thing with Bob Berlin, Bob Berlin was an Cook County State's Attorney. Just, really, really easy to deal with on any one of these like crime issues that, comes up. And I gotta throw my head off to the new Cook County State's Attorney too. I mean, we've had a lot of good success working with her office and crimes that have occurred in that Cook County part of town. I think we're trending in the right direction.
Great. Electric cars,
Mhm.
that's what I mean.
So are there any TV shows or movies that you think accurately reflect?
You never watch them. So I've got like I got three adult girls that are, well, I got three kids out of college. And girls are fascinated with like crime shows and murder shows. And they're usually trying to suck me in. It's like some HBO from there, they're always watching. And it's like that. No, so they don't do crime.
So if we were to be away from home for an extended period,
Mhm.
we've got security lights, maybe neighbors checking on things. Would you recommend that we call the office and say,
Yeah, there's a portal that you can call in and, so we know that you're gone. I guess the only way that helps is if there's some sort of suspicious incident on your block, maybe somebody saw a suspicious car, or a suspicious person, we're able to quickly check the database and then we would know to go and check that out. But your neighbors are probably your best friends. And like, making sure that those lights are, what I used to do talks on burglary prevention a long time ago. And they, we used to say like, never put lights on right in front of the windows. We used to refer to them as burglar beacons. Because any reasonable person would go down the street at dusk and go, no, this person's not really home. So I mean, having like interior lights on timers, so it looks like your house looks lived in, is probably the best thing you can do, having that mail picked up. My neighbors, if they're gone in the winter, if there's a dusting of slow, I'm driving my car up and down their driveway to at least leave some tire tracks. Something, so if somebody just comes blind in the neighborhood looking for a geographic thing. So like that burglary that I outlined at the beginning of the, those guys are, they're targeting, before they hit the village limits. They've already researched what neighborhood they're looking at and what houses they're looking at. They've already come with the list. There's some burglars though, that come into a neighborhood just geographically. Maybe they hit, the previous Friday, 2 ramps farther down on the expressway, and they're just moving in a geographic manner to avoid detection. Those are the individuals where, they'll go into a neighborhood blind and they're just looking for opportunities. They don't have something in mind before they get there. And that's where the tips of like making your house look lived in, picking up like if my neighbors are coming home late, I'll take their rollers and bring them up past their driveway, so it looks like they're at least home. Those are the things that probably help you avoid this, because when they're driving down the street, they have nothing in mind. They're just looking for something that looks intriguing. Any other questions? Right, thank you. If you want the e-bike, the new e-bike stuff, it's on that back table. And I should have put my contact information, but I did not. But I'm on the website. My direct line and my email at the meeting. Again, please feel free to give me a call. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. I already know it's good.
Thank you.